Welcome to the panel, Bridging the Gender Gap, Global Women for All. My name is Maha Mustafa Aqil. I'll be moderating this session. Introduce myself. I'm a senior member in Asbar Council, a Riyadh focused on intellectual, cultural, political, social, and developmental issues. I have 15 years of experience in an intergovernmental organization in the field of media, as well as in social affairs, which exposed me to firsthand knowledge on a wide range of issues around the world, from political to social and economic. I was the Director of Public Information Communications before becoming Director of Social Affairs. Let me first brief you a little bit about the purpose of this panel before I introduce our prominent speakers. The purpose of this panel is to find real solutions to bridging the gap for women's equality. Throughout the years, the G20 has made numerous commitments towards the advancement of women and the promise of economic justice for all women. While civil society commends the G20 countries for these commitments, such as the Brisbane Goal, we urge the G20 to accelerate steps towards delivering by 2025. As a global issue that requires global efforts, local level action should also be taken to reduce the gender gap. This session will provide an introduction to issues facing women globally and a discussion between global gender experts on how these issues can be overcome through policy and practical solutions. The focus of this dialogue regards the inclusion of gender issues in both the C20 and G20 conversation and highlights the need for mindful objectives such as education, access to resources, and empowerment. The expected outcome of this session is to provide potential policy solutions that could work globally to advance the proposed gender objectives for the G20. And now I'll introduce the distinguished speakers. We have with us here today, Christina Catalano, the creator of this panel. Christina was named a disruptive startup by Forbes Under 30 and is a noted civil rights activist. She's the founder and CEO of Thrive Innovation, an education startup that creates innovative solutions and teaching services for clients. Catalano is also the founder and chairman of the Rise Anti-Bullying Initiative, which has grown to become one of the largest and amongst the most recognized anti-bullying initiatives in the world. Catalano has fought for not only anti-bullying policy, but has won policy battles for women's rights and democracy. Next, we have Marguerita Herdosi, CEO and President of the Board Renaissance Holdings and Young Presidents Organization in Costa Rica. Marguerita Herdosi leads her family office, which invests in and manages a diverse portfolio of financial, technology, healthcare, AI, and behavior modification, and general services around the world, and was featured on the cover of Forbes Mexico. She also runs projects in residential and commercial real estate, including City Tower at Acropolis in the Dominican Republic and duty-free zones in Costa Rica. We have Amanda Pollinger. She is the Chief Executive Officer of 100 Women in Finance. She leads a staff team and provides direction to 500 volunteer practitioners globally. The organization, which now has over 17,000 members in 26 locations, is focused on empowering women in the finance industry and inspiring the next generation of pre-career young women. Ms. Pollinger is a former principal of Aquamarine Capital Management, where she was responsible over a period of 7 years for managing marketing, investor relations, and back office administration for 2 private investment funds. We also have Dr. Grazia, who has helped women overcome gender bias to launch and advance their careers, founding Summa Veritas Foundation, which has special consultative status with ECOSOC. Her specialization in gender has led her to be Vice President of the Women's Parliament, a city legislator, member of the Advisory Council of the Argentine Chancellery, as well as of the Gender Commission of the Strategic Plan of Buenos Aires City. She promoted the creation of laws such as the Equal Pay Day and the Law of Economy of Care. With us also Marie Silverstein, an invested in many tech startups, prior her to also join a venture capital fund, advise startups, mentor women in STEM, and has a great understanding of our present fiat and the future of digital currency. She has traveled the world to study, invest, and speak about today's technology, including Davos in 2020. She was also named one of the top 101 top women in blockchain. We also have happy to have Maria Grazia Penanzi, the president of the non-governmental organization of the Italian Association for Women in Development, EIDOS. She is a member of the board of the Italian Network on Global Health and of the coordination of the Italian Coalition Against Poverty in Italy. Since 1997, she has been working with EIDOS as coordinator of development and advocacy projects for women's rights globally. Last but certainly not least, we have Yvonne Berry, the founder and managing partner, Plentitude LLC. She's a strategic advisor to family offices, asset managers, and select businesses and philanthropic organizations. She has over 20 years of diverse experience across the financial sector, developing and growing private companies and investment institutions, as also a UN representative. So we have a prominent panel of speakers from diverse backgrounds and rich experiences. And we will start our session with Christina Catalano. What can be done to further progress G20 gender commitments and goals? What are gaps in the G20?
So thank you for the question and thank you for having me. So as we both know, this G20 presidency has specifically made women's issues a priority. But in order for the G20 presidency to truly make good, Maha, on their promise to put women at the forefront, they had to both confront and address the issue of basic human rights that are currently lacking globally. Firstly, without basic human rights, we cannot fully elevate women's rights. Without the fundamental, how can the actual be achieved? The fundamental is the actual, Maha. Without this, without the fundamental, and without the actual, how can the elevation of women's rights happen? And this is why. Not every country allows women's rights to be fully recognized. The G20 needs to make a universal agreement to allow all women to open bank accounts, to inherit land and assets, to access credit lines and loans, to apply for jobs without a male present, and to travel without a male present. Maha, you'd be surprised to learn that while it's a given in many, many countries, there are G20 countries that still do not have these rights, and countless countries beyond the G20 that follow suit. 72 countries do not have these rights for women. I'm going to repeat that number again. 72 countries do not have these rights for women. All the rights I listed are not there, not present for 72 countries. According to a 2019 report from the World Economic Forum, there are 72 countries that do not allow women to open bank accounts, to access credit lines, or loans. And there are 25 countries, in the very least, where women don't even have the right to the same inheritance and asset rights as men. So, Maha, given that so many countries don't have these basic rights for women, then how can women as a whole achieve equality without the basics? It's like building on blocks that don't actually exist. It's impossible to build off of because they don't have real progress. How can women globally begin to see themselves as equal and be treated as equal if they can't even gain access to the same things that men enjoy access to as well? All of us on this panel may not even be sitting here, Maha, speaking to you if we didn't have these basic rights. Would any of us have made it in business, higher education, global affairs? I personally have went. And into anything that requires independence, it wouldn't have happened, at least for me, personally speaking. I can't imagine, Maha, not being able to open a bank account. I can't imagine not being able to apply for a job, access credit lines, or walk down the street without a male present. So a two-pronged approach needs to be allowed. A global agreement allowing all women to open bank accounts, to inherit land and assets, to access credit lines and loans, to apply for jobs without a male present, and to travel without a male present. And even if a country, Maha, considers itself highly developed for women, there's still a fundamental problem that exists: the wage gap. We like to pretend, Maha, that's not there, that women's rights, and even if those basic rights I spoke about, they're granted, now make women equal. So pretend that you live in a country that allows you to open bank accounts, access credit lines. We're considered equal now as women, but that's simply not the case. Women are not being treated equally because they're not being paid equally, Maha. There's no other way around it. Again, on a fundamental level, women are not being paid the same as men for the same exact job with the same exact performance success level in the workplace. It's parallel to the problem of women in certain countries not being able to open their own bank accounts. Men automatically will get ahead, while women are being paid less, being treated like they are less, and have less access to everything. We all know that being paid less means having access to less. Thus, there must be an agreement to close the wage gap as well by passing a policy, the G20, that requires all employers, irrespective of sector, to pay women the equal amount that men make in the same position. We can include these in the summit. Why wouldn't a world leader, Maha, want to? This is a universal agreement that can happen now. It's not a big ask, and it can make a world of a difference. Agreeing on these basic and fundamental human rights can actually become a landmark year for the G20 instead of a wash year for the G20. And this could be the year that the G20 presidency announced that they hold a higher priority for women, but actually not only say that, but do it. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. You've actually touched on many issues regarding women's rights as fundamental and basic human rights, which are, of course, very important. As we recognized and we realized recently that even though there has been a lot of progress that has been done in some countries more than others, we're still lagging behind in other countries, including in countries that we think or assume are advanced in terms of women equality, but we notice that there is still a gender gap in wages, as you pointed out. So there are some basic fundamental human rights that we still need to address and overcome in order to achieve women's gender equality. Dr. Garcia, same question to you. What can be done to further progress G20 gender commitments and goals? What are gaps in the G20 towards women that need to be addressed?
Well, Maha, we have first the social protection systems. You know, in spite of G20 members endorse the universal social protection, we still, through the 2030 agenda, and it is also in some sustainable development goals, we still have 71% of the world population that can access to safety protection. And some of them have partial access to its benefits. And we really need investments on gender response, social protection, because most of these 70% are poor people and are women. So we need to further progress with that. And this goes with another gap. We have disruptions on jobs and technology. We have artificial intelligence, with the fourth revolution in technology, and the pandemic too. So this is going to change the landscape in work and in jobs. So we have the gap in women in education, and this gonna change. We have a lot of unemployment, so we will need a safety net in short terms to help these people that will be unemployed. So also we will have new job creations, and we are now talking about hybrid jobs. You know, hybrid jobs are a mix of traditional business knowledge and technical knowledge. So we have another gap, which is the gender digital divide gap for women. Without equal access to technology or internet, girls and women are not able to participate in this digital economy and society that we have all today. So if you think we have 400 million of women around the world in low income countries that are unconnected. They don't know anything about technology or internet or so on. So technology is a powerful tool, especially for women, because it's good for learning, it's good for advocacy, it's good for earn extra money doing technological jobs, it's good to update their skills. And we have in some countries some apps that are give health advice to women too. So it's very important to the digital training. Over 90% of jobs worldwide have digital components and request digital skills. And another point that we have to pay attention is to be safe online, because there is some discrimination online, and women have the same right as men to speak freely without being harassed and to feel safe when they are online. We have another gap, which is what Christina told, is the gender payback. It remains substantial in most G20 countries with very modest progress in closing it. We had 23% earning less around the world than men. This is reflected on women because they have low-paid jobs, part-time works, lower access to CEO positions, for example. The recommendation is that we need intersectoral dialogues between government, private sector, and NGOs, because we need that corporation enterprises do evolution performance reviews, eliminate the sexual harassment at works, which is strong, and begin to train managers to lead diverse teams. Also, we have the gender gap in labor force. And here most G20 economies had gender goal of reducing gender gap 25% by 2025. This was done on G20 Australia in 2014. But half of these G20 economies are close to get it, but the other half is very far of it. So the recommendation is that we need to monitor the 25 by 25 outcomes to hold G20 members accountable. This can be done promoting discussions, elaborating annual reports, collect compare figures, and in this particular 25% by 25, it was done by Women 20. And we have another problem here with Women 20, because they had a great success with this, but they can go further because women delegates, they don't have an organized structure. They don't have a permanent committee. So, and they don't have the financial money to do annual reports or compare figures and to do lobby with the G20 members or to reach ministers, especially on finance, that we need to go on. So these are the gaps that I think we G20 people must discuss.
All right. Also interesting. And do you think usually, you know, when we talk about discrimination or underrepresentation of women, especially in certain sectors, like you said, in finance, do you think quotas is a good option? Is that something that women need to ask for, that we have in legislations, that is, you know, to have more women in leadership positions through quotas?
Well, with quotas, what happens that is mixed, it has mixed results. Reality is that quotas bring women voices into political systems, and otherwise they will be excluded. But and policymakers love quotas, they are very popular. But there exists a great debate on the results, because opponents of quotas says that quotas may reinforce the stereotypes and to political women, and there is no proof that gender quotas bring policy changes, and it's not automatically translated into more women and in powerful positions. But I see it's good. You see in some developing countries like India, when they use the seat reservation, it was good because it's changed the view of men about women in politics. So it's not, is it good, but we need to change some things, because in other countries, what happens that they put women on the list, but they put them in not winning positions. So they cover the quota, but women can access to power. So I think we need to change that.
Yeah, so it's not enough just to have women there or even to be in a leadership position, but to actually have the mandates and the ability to lead and to play a role. So it's not enough just to have women there, but for them to have the ability to be effective in their role. Maria Grazia, what do you think of that? And what can be done to progress the establishment of a G20 gender working group as a way of enforcing or making women's role more effective?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this session of the Civil 20. And I really appreciate your question, because it's very important to speak about this gender working group. But before, I would like to just stress a concept that now was coming from our speaker that spoke before me, and that the gender inequality, we have to call it with the correct name. Gender inequality is a structural issue. It is something that is in our society, and in every society, and that this gender inequality produce tragic consequences. We spoke about the discrimination on the economic context, but let me stress how big is the phenomena of violence against women, that take different forms, from feminicide to harmful practices. We know that violence against women is one of the most prevalent human rights violations in the world. And it knows no social, economic, or national boundaries. Worldwide, an estimated 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual abuse in her lifetime. And I am speaking about this because gender-based violence undermines the health, dignity, security, and autonomy of its victims. Survivors of violence can suffer sexual and reproductive health consequences, including forced and unwanted pregnancies, unsafe abortion, and the sexually transmitted infection. All these affect women's life and girls' life, so also the social and in the political sphere too. Let's think only to the pandemic crisis that we are living in this period. The pandemic of COVID-19 is an unexpected emergency, while gender-based violence is not an unexpected emergency with the dimension of the phenomena. And if we think to the huge and the shared reaction and efforts put in place by the countries to face COVID-19, I think that we should have the same urgency to put in place extraordinary measures to face gender equality and gender violence. This, for me, the elimination of gender inequality is a political issue, as well as the establishment of a G20 gender working group. It will be fundamental because it will represent the will of the G20 leaders to work to the real achievement of gender equality. And let me remember what said Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, when urged the government to put women and girls at the center of their recovery efforts. But I think that we have to change our approach. We want not to go back to the lifestyle and to the policy pre-COVID. Now it's time to change our paradigm. If we want to really to put women and girls at the center, they must stay at the center. And the politician might be aware about this. The establishment of the group, of course, it could be important, but it does not represent the solution. And it doesn't mean that it will work and produce the expected outcome unless specific and coherent objective, mandate, and criteria for its composition are established. And I think that this group must be framed in a wider context, because, for example, in the context of CSO, in our world, in the world of the network, non-government organization working in advocacy, like also we do. We always speak about coherence of policy, and I never heard about coherence of policy, including also gender equality policies. They are always out from this coherence. And the same occurs with the accountability. In some contexts, we have accountability report on a specific issue. And I never heard about an accountability report to our government on the advancement of gender equality. A part of the SIDAO report and the NGO have also the opportunity to prepare a shadow report, like also the Istanbul Convention. But it's important, for example, to have accountability report on the gender in the gender equality achievement. Also, like other accountability report on climate change, financial, and so on. So I think that it would be important to have this group, but we need to create, to let the group works well.
Okay. Thank you, Maria. Actually, the issues that you raised about gender-based violence is, of course, very disturbing, and we noted that with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a rise actually in gender-based violence against women, including domestic violence across the world. Women were also affected negatively by the COVID in other ways as well. They were most affected in terms of their employment. More women lost their jobs, especially women working in the unofficial sector. Most of the sectors that were affected by the COVID, such as tourism, and this is where most women worked. And this is gets us into the issue of discrimination in terms of sectors as well. There's a gap in where women work. We find more women working in certain sectors, while men work in other sectors that are more financially rewarding. So this is another area where we have gender discrimination and needs to be addressed. So yeah, having a G20 gender working group is important. We'll probably address some of these issues. I'll move on to Marguerita now. How can gender issues be highlighted, addressed, and defeated? I mean, this is a broad question, but there are many issues that have been raised so far, but maybe you can add to that. How can gender issues be highlighted, addressed, and defeated? Is there an effective way to achieve the majority of these objectives globally in a shorter amount of time? Because in the Brisbane goal, the target was to have 25% to reduce the gender gap 25% by 2025, and we're still far from that. So Marguerita?
Yes, hello, greetings everybody. I do have 3 concrete ideas that I think can have a big impact. And first, let me say that having this meeting is one step forward, because the more meetings like this we have, that we can highlight the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the more we are likely to achieve them. I mean, if you ask people on the street, what are the United Nations Sustainable Goals? Most people will not be able to list them. You know, there are 17 of them, but I'm sure people wouldn't even be able to list 5. So if we did a little bit more of work with the social media and with the influencers that we have, let's convince a few movie stars to go and repeat them ad nauseum, you know, things like that. So this is a big step. And, you know, 2015 was when they were created. 2017, they were made more actionable. But how big is it that the chairman of this year's G20 is King Salman bin Abdulaziz? That is a big deal. And I want to give, you know, a hurrah to that. And that is a big deal that we have Saudi Arabia chairing this event. And it cannot be something that goes unsaid, because it's very easy to criticize the things that haven't been done, but this is a big deal and we need to, you know, honor and congratulate that part. And as many of you guys mentioned, Maja, Christina, Graciela, and Maria Grazia, you know, the International Labor Organization says that if we close the gender gap, we would have $5.3 trillion more in the global GDP. That is huge, huge. So the 3 ideas that I want to speak to you about are preferential financing and changing the credit ratings, zoonotic diseases and the effect it has on plant-based eating, that's number 2. And then religion, renewal, and responsibility. Those are the 3 subjects I want to talk to you about. So the number 1, very easy to do, very easy to execute, and huge impact. If we change the credit ratings for preferential lending, we can immediately close the gender gap. There are a lot of preferred rate lending in the world that comes from governments and NGOs, and they have certain criteria. Those criteria do not include criteria that close the gender gap. If we give companies a little bit better interest rate on their lending, lower interest rate in their lending, if they have gender gap closing mechanisms, we will immediately catalyze those companies to the change. You know, when we hear all the statistics that the previous discussants mentioned, they are enormous. Usually put the money where your mouth is. Put the money where your mouth is. If the preferential rates are going to companies that are closing the gender gap, we will have change like that, because even men-led organizations want the preferential interest rates. And what would be some of those things that could be included in those metrics? Women on boards, for sure. It was mentioned before. How can, first of all, how can the world have companies that don't have women on boards? But also, forgive the adjective, how dumb can that be? I mean, most of the consumer decisions are made by women, even if the women are not necessarily the breadwinners. Women are the ones who go to the markets. They are the ones who choose what milk we buy, what cereal we buy. So why not put women on board? It's a great business decision, but it should be a criteria for preferential interest rate lending. Another criteria is childcare. Do companies give childcare? You know, we talk a lot about maternity leave. I believe in maternity leave too, but I think if I had to choose, I would prefer free childcare to a maternity leave, because I do not want my career, you know, to disappear while I'm taking care of my child. I want to be a multitasker like women are. You know, we are nature-born multitaskers. We can work, we can take care of our children. We need job places that give us free childcare. So give preferential interest rates to companies that have childcare, free childcare. Another important issue for these interest rate metrics, we need to have elder women. You know, elder women are some of the poorest population. Do we have elder women in the task force? Why not? Elder women sometimes are free of their childcare needs. So why don't we have them in positions in companies that can be there? So include elder women presence in your companies for preferential interest rates. The second subject is zoonotic diseases. You mentioned it, Maja, the effect of zoonotic diseases, coronavirus, that is an example, on the world and the pandemic. Women have been hurt the most. In Costa Rica, which is where I live, there's 24% unemployment right now because of coronavirus. 30% is women. So you see, it's horrendous what the effect that it has had on women. You know, we are the main caretakers, the main healthcare workers. So if more people ate, what's the idea in this idea number 2? Plant-based eating. If we ate less animals, whether they're wild animals or animals that are farm-raised, we would have less zoonotic diseases and less effect of the pandemias we have once in a while, affecting women more than they affect the rest of the population. And the third idea that I have, it's very controversial, but it's very important. And I called it religion, renewal, and responsibility. I'm a very religious person. And I, believe in most of the tenets of my religion. If we don't tackle organized religion, there is absolutely no way that women's issues, especially in all the countries that Maria Grazia, Graciela, Christina mentioned, are going to be changed. And religion is only tackled in 2 ways, from the hierarchy and from the base. It requires demand on the base. All of us who are the faithful, who pray and who believe in God and want, to do the change. We need men and women of religion to affect the change. And then we need the leaders. Look at the difference of this Pope has done, to women and gays and how we are treated and respected. It takes both. So we cannot forego our responsibility as the faithful lay people in respectfully request and exercise and live our change in our families, in our organizations. So those are my 3 ideas. Change the credit ratings in preferential lending, eat more plant-based food so we can lower zoonotic diseases, and then institute religious renewal and responsibility.
Thank you very much, Margarita. These are very important and practical recommendations, actually. And I want to thank you first about what you said about Saudi Arabia under King Salman. Really, in the past few years, we have made tremendous progress in terms of women's empowerment and women's rights just within a few years. So I'm very proud of what we have done so far. So, and of course, there's always more that can be done everywhere in the world. We cannot say, no country can say that they have achieved all that is possible that can be achieved for women empowerment. As numbers and statistics show, there's still gender inequality in many countries in terms of education for women, accessing education, financial rights, health rights, and other things. So that's why this is the discussion that we're having today is important, as you mentioned. But I also want to ask you about, in terms of legislations, is that enough to make the change? Because as you pointed out, sometimes the change needs to come from the top, from leadership. It's not only the communities or society. It has to be both ways, through legislations, through leadership, but also change the mindsets, the stereotypes, the cultural and traditional beliefs. So what do you think about that, Margarita?
Legislation is not enough. It's only one of the of the many ways we have to face the gender gap. And usually legislation comes from popular demand. Legislators are elected to affect policies that the populace wants. So that is why I think religion and culture are so important. Religion plays a huge part, not only of religious people's everyday lives. Religion plays a huge part on how we think of culture. They are totally intertwined. So if we do not act like we are all children of God, there is no way, that we cannot affect. And then we need to do it on the business side. I'm a businesswoman. I cannot have a company that doesn't have women, equal pay for women in there. A majority of women, is to childcare is to maternity leave and then call myself a woman who promotes the gender gap. As more and more women like me become CEOs of their companies and also financial investors, let's pick to invest only on companies that have, that are bridging the gender gap. So it's not only legislature. We need to put it from, the business. Usually business changes things way faster than government does. Look at all the, the major new unicorns in the world. They're changing the world much more than governments are. So we need to affect change through the private sector.
Absolutely. Because sometimes even when you do have the laws, it's the implementing, it's the follow-up. It's actually the on the ground implementation of any laws that are passed. Amanda, since you are also a CEO and a board on the board of a company, so you understand what Marguerita was talking about, having women in board of companies. What insights are needed to understand women's issues on micro level and macro level?
So thank you so much, Maha, for having me. And it's lovely to be in this group of women and we're all kind of coming at this from different angles, but I think it's really interesting to hear different people's perspectives. And Marguerita, I really appreciate some of your practical perspectives. I come at this as somebody who really looks for practical solutions to issues. And I think at the macro level, in the industry in which I'm based, which is the finance industry, we need to see demographic change in the industry. But I think rather than focusing on why don't we have demographic change, why haven't we seen more women in top roles in the industry up to now, I'm really focused on saying, okay, how do we get there? How do we create that change? And I think there are two key ways from a macro perspective that we create that change. The first is visibility. So we may say, for example, that there are only 7% of the world's fund managers that are women. It's a pathetic number, right? 7%, and that hasn't changed in 30 years. But rather than focusing on the lack of women, what we've done as an organization is to highlight who are those women, create visibility for those women. And that visibility matters for a number of reasons. So if you go onto our website, we've collected 500 headshots of women who are fund managers across private equity, real estate, VC, hedge funds, long-only funds. First of all, for those women themselves, as I say to those women, you may be outperforming men, but if investors don't know you exist, you'll never grow your business. So we need to give these women opportunities to be at conferences, to speak to the media, to engage with investors. So we've created a number of mechanisms where women who are in those roles are visible to investors and to their own colleagues. And as I say to them all the time, the reality is that in this industry, we say that performance is the key issue. But the reality is it needs to be more than performance. You need to be visible. You need to be out there talking to investors. And so visibility matters for those women themselves. It also, I believe, is critical for the next generation of young women. Because as we all know, you can't be what you can't see. And so what we are doing is really focusing on ensuring visibility of those women in different roles in the industry, but particularly on the investment side, to the next generation of young teenage girls who right now view this industry as being male-dominated, opaque, about making rich people richer. And yet, much of what we do in this industry is about creating change for ordinary people. Think about the pension funds, think about endowments, foundations. All of the investment returns in those areas are creating opportunities for ordinary people, not the wealthy. And so we need the next generation to be able to see that it's possible, to get excited about those investment roles. And I believe the key way that we can do that is through those role models, through women who are in those roles today and creating that visibility. So I think step one in creating demographic change is to acknowledge women who are in those key roles, to create opportunities for those roles to be open and accessible, for the pathways of those women to be known to the next generation. The second macro issue that I think is critical in terms of creating demographic change is engaging men in the conversation. So obviously there's been a lot of us versus them in our industry and many other industries. I don't believe that we can create change on our own. And I think for far too long, women have been talking to each other about this issue and not engaging with men in a pragmatic and an open fashion. And so a lot of the work that I do, and a lot of the time when I'm speaking at conferences around the world, I want to engage with the men in the audience. And here's the question that I will ask for men in the audience. I'll say, for those men in the audience, raise your hand if you have a daughter, a sister, a female partner, a mother. That always gets you because everybody's putting their hand up for that. And what I will then say is, think about those individuals. Do you want those individuals to have equal access to opportunity? What man is going to say no to that, right? So when you put it in very personal terms, it's a way of engaging men in the conversation. And the second thing that I've found to be really helpful in engaging men is I have a top 10 list of ways that men can help move the needle for women in the industry. And what I would say is that I think the vast majority of men in our industry want to be helpful. They actually want to see change happen, but they genuinely don't know how to do it. And so we need to help give them ways in which they can make change in their own small area. And so inside of firms, right, the systemic issues that we know are within firms, the cultural issues that are in firms, those won't change until those at the top, which are predominantly men still, understand why those issues are preventing women from getting to the top, preventing more women from being in those investment roles. But again, I give them a practical list of things to do. And I'll give you one example that I give you, and it relates back to visibility. What I will say to men is, look at your team. And for now, not forever, when you are sponsoring a conference, choose one of the women in your team to be on that stage, talking about what they are expert at. And if that woman isn't comfortable, get her a coach, support her, encourage her, and push her to be visible. And most men will say, I can do that. Okay, I can do that one. Okay, what else would you want me to do? So I think from a macro perspective, it's really about acknowledging that we aren't where we want to be, but giving the visibility into those women who are in those roles, and also engaging men. From a micro perspective, from an individual perspective, I believe that the biggest single issue for most professional women in, particularly in the finance industry, is that they find themselves the only one in the room, the only one in their role. And there's a double whammy for a lot of women in the developed world. If they are working mothers, they are often the only one in their community as well. And that double whammy of feeling like you are different, you are the only one in the workplace and you're the only one at home, is, I believe, a psychological hurdle that we don't talk enough about as globally. That sense of being alone is really tough. And so what we as an organization are focused on is creating peer groups, connecting women together with whom you have things in common, where it's not about complaining about men. It's not even about complaining about our jobs necessarily. It's about connecting with someone who understands the challenges, who understands, and with whom you can share experiences, challenges, opportunities. And so one of the most powerful things we've put in place is what we call our next gen groups. These are for women in the industry with 0 to 10 years experience. At the very start of their career, we are putting them together with other young women. And I believe that by building that peer group that's going to go with them throughout their career, we will see more women stick with this industry. We will see more women succeed, because a problem shared truly is a problem halved. When we can get out of our own heads and talk to somebody else about our experiences and understand how did they cope with it? How did they challenge the system? How did they manage to be a mother and get to the top, right? We need to be together. And so a lot of our focus is on making sure that women know each other in this industry so that they can grow together.
Great, wonderful. This is very nice. Yeah, I agree with you in terms of having men on board, because you know, just like you said, you know, men, you know, they have a mother, a sister, a wife. We all also have fathers, brothers, a husband, even a boss or a colleague who have been supportive and you know, pushing you and guiding you. So yes, absolutely. I mean, men are of course our partners, and rely. I mentioned the mentoring, role models, having visible women whom we can look up to, as well as the importance of networking. And we all know that in terms of networking, sometimes women's good to learn from each other's experiences. I'll go on to Yvonne. What solutions and policies can help overcome the gender issues that face us globally? How can we collectively advocate for these practical solutions?
So thank you for inviting me to the C20 conversation in this panel on bridging the gender gap. I acknowledge and commend the G20 countries for their commitment aimed at achieving gender equality and securing the economic empowerment of women. The G20 has made effort and strides in the past years regarding achieving this goal. Bisbane, as we all discussed earlier, the G20 leaders' commitment to reducing the participation gap between men and women by 25% by 2025 is a beacon initiative and a starter roadmap to reducing poverty and achieving gender equality for women. Despite that, women's economic empowerment has been identified as a priority for the G20 and other international forums. Basic human rights, gender-based violence, education, economic choices, income, and control over assets continue to lag behind those of men. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report for 2020 found it could take another 99.5 years until the economic gender gap is closed. I don't think it doesn't necessarily need to take 99.5 years. With that, yes, gender issues do have complexities, but they are not that complicated either. The actual execution of closing the gap is the challenge. And with that, in order to close the gap, the gender gap of inequality, it is important to acknowledge that each country has their own cultural and economic differences, even within the country itself, and are at different stages of achieving gender equality. So I think we need to be aware that everybody is not going to elevate at one level. And so at this time, a one-size-fits-all approach won't work. Considering solutions and policy, I have 3 core suggestions for this conversation. 1, to develop within each country an independent coalition of women across regions and cities that would comprise all socioeconomic backgrounds. By building a national coalition of women within each country, women can speak as one meaningful voice. There, they will build respect for each other, women to women, and address issues that are relevant to them and prioritize initiatives that are relevant to their needs in their country at that time. And they would work alongside of their governments in implementing those priorities. All within the aim to move the global the goal towards parity and with more progressive peer countries, in line with progressive peer countries. In order to prevent any stagnation or pushback by the governments or other entities within the country, each country will need to implement a defined percentage of achievement each year or within periods of time. In order for there to be a workable change for women, women need to be included in decision-making in all phases of the policy cycle, including idea generation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. All levels of decision-making in national, regional, local, business, social, and organizational settings as well. I believe that this kind of coalition within each of these countries would accomplish this goal. The second solution would be collaborating with grassroots movements and organizations to work with boys and young men to scale up best practices to break down harmful gender norms and stereotypes. I believe without addressing gender norms and stereotypes, all of this good policy and effort and initiatives won't last, and the gender gap will not close. The third solution would be to implement public and private entrepreneurship, employment, and education programs for women, and very controversially, I mentioned men as well. I include men because when we elevate men along with women, we accelerate the path towards gender equality. In summary, in order to achieve the goal of equality, we need to continue to advocate for smart policy strategies and hold those who do not embrace human dignity for all accountable. With that, I believe it's a good business solution and financially rewarding for the countries to achieve gender equality. So in closing, I would like to also mention that whatever my solutions that I suggested and policy suggestions, I would like to include the LGBTQ community and the disabled, because I believe all three are interchangeable in this conversation. So that's my contribution. It's a little bit short, but I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Yvonne. Actually, short but concise and comprehensive at the same time, because it focuses on inclusivity, which is important. Before we go to taking questions from the audience, I wanted to ask Christina, what variations in goals should be taken into account when designing women inclusive policies? Can we achieve them globally for women around the world on a local level?
That's a great question, Maha. Being practical, having a 2, 3, 4-pronged approach, and approaching this as we have to look at the local, we have to look at the state level, and we have to look at the national and the international for all countries. And we have to take cultural and legal norms into respect, but also change them. It's not impractical to avoid women's rights. Someone who says it is means that they just don't want it. That doesn't have to be the case. And if nobody pushes for it, change will simply not occur. The end result is when women can not only feel equal, but be equal. When we don't have to have panels and discussions regarding as to why women are still where they are. It doesn't mean that we don't have dialogue. It just means the reasons for a dialogue will change. Instead of why are women not enjoying full rights in 2020 globally, we will be discussing how do we ensure that the progress that we have achieved stabilizes and continues. The day that women don't feel a sense of fear walking into a meeting with a group of men because they know in the back of their minds that they'll certainly be treated differently. I think that's the day we could say women's rights has been fully achieved and equality has been fully achieved. I think it's possible. I truly do.
That's great. I think we're all hopeful, and I think we're all believe that we can get there. Dr. Grazia, what is the clear end result of fulfilling the gender gap? What do you think the outcome, the results for fulfilling the gender gap?
I think we need to take in account designing women inclusive policies, bolstering political support to step up political advocacy for gender equality is necessary to include gender issues in all fields. Action visibility is another point. Increasing visibility starts with communication without gender stereotypes, and it also means establishing indicators to evaluate businesses' actions. Supporting stakeholders is another way, using various platforms between various stakeholders with the aim of developing discussions and feedback. Sharing results with stakeholders, because if we need to fulfill a dialogue between all stakeholders, information must be in all ways creating expertise as a strong driver in gender equality. Clear channels to express voices of both women and men, effective and gender diverse institutions for implementing gender equality agenda. As we told before, better financing for actions for equality to ensure that resources are available to act concretely on projects to reduce gender inequality. Gender tools, we can use gender tools, we have a lot for gender decision making and robust evidence to measure progress in and end this inequality. We need to advocate building relationships with others through alliances, coalitions, and you say also networks. So we need to send evidence-based messages. When messages link with high-level policy, community-level empowerment and participation, decisions makers listen and incorporate recommendations in policy development. Another thing which is important is whose message and who's the messenger matter. Messaging and capacity strengthening efforts must prioritize the importance of advances, priorities, and solutions for women if development policy is going to work for everyone. Diversity is the foundation of an effective collective voice. The more diverse the advocates, the more revealing the collective voice is. And at last, multidimensional advocacy capacity to be effective, collective advocacy research, training, coaching, tools, and engagement should be collaborative, representative, and hands-on.
Thank you. Those are very important and very insightful. Marguerita, we always hear about commitments from countries about eliminating violence, about putting policies in place, about helping women achieve access to healthcare, protection, social justice. I mean, we're not short of announced commitments from countries, but what do you think are usually the obstacles for achieving that? Why haven't we yet achieved the goals that were the target goals for gender equality in basic human rights?
Because countries and the leaders do not put the money where their mouths are. You know, follow the money trail, and then you'll follow what they really want to do in this life. The companies that get financed, the preferential loans are given to companies who are not doing anything in general to bridge the gap for women. So add a metric into preferential loan credit ratings and country credit ratings that includes a gap reducing, gender gap reducing actions, and you will see like that change. Just put it on a list and you will see. Look at countries, look at ministries of the economy, trying to find, you know, loans, international loans for their countries, for renegotiating their debts. If a metric on gender gap is included, they're going to be going like that. you know, running to change, you know, and it's at the beginning, it might be cosmetic, you know, the changes just to fit into the application, but later on, they will become more and more ingrained. Do the same with companies. Give them a difference of 1% on a loan. If the 1% is a better rate is given to companies who are bridging the gap, you're going to see them run like that. This is not theoretical, you know, political ideas. This is concrete, and it could be done in this upcoming ministers of finance meetings. They're going to be meeting, I understand, in a month. Let's request for that. And then that, you know, the other thing is the time has come for us not to skirt the issue of religion and the gender gap. The time has come. We have skirted that issue a long time because it's a sensitive issue. But the church doesn't belong to men. We are the church. We are the church. We are the majority of the human population. We're more than 50%. And we are pious women and men who want equality of treatment for all the human beings in this country. So let's start, you know, demanding it in a respectful but consistent way. You know, we're not talking about eliminating men in anything. I'm a mother of 3 sons. I want a world for men too. You know, I want a world where my sons are respected equally. But I want a church where I am respected too. And it doesn't matter what religion we are. We need to face that. The time has come for religion to face the gender gap issue. It has come. And a practical message I want to give to the men and women here in the audience that we can do on the individual level. Do you think ambition is feminine or masculine? A lot of women are told ambition is not feminine. There is nothing wrong with being ambitious. You know, there is nothing wrong with being aggressive in how you face your job and all of that. There is your values on how you use the money you make, you know, with your ambition. And that is, you know, every person has a right to their own set of values. And that's where we can be more, you know, more philanthropic. But ambition is feminine. It's not anti-feminine. We need to teach women, little girls, to negotiate. And if you're a man, teach your daughters to negotiate. I, as a businesswoman, interview men and women all the time. And typically, men, you can tell them you're going to pay them whatever amount, and they will always say it's too little. You say to a woman, and she will say, okay. We need to teach women. And for all of you women in the audience listening, whenever you negotiate, ask for more. Ask for more. You might just get it. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, being ambitious is feminine, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And the other thing, a practical tip to everyone in the audience, mirror women. When you are in a table with other women and men, say, you know, repeat, like Maha said, I agree with this. A lot of times women's voices get drowned among men's voices. We women need to be mirroring each other, reinforcing each other, calling each other by name, so that the idea that Maha and Christina and Maria Graciela and Yvonne gave doesn't get, you know, all of a sudden given to a man. So we need to support each other by reiterating the opinions we hear, the good opinions we hear, so that credit is given to where credit is due. But most importantly, if we want fast economic change, let's ask our ministers of finance and ministers of the economy to start only giving preferential loans to companies who close the gender gap. And also, let's request in our churches to put the gender gap issue front and center.
Thank you. That's really great. Maria, since this is a C20 summit, how much of a role, what is the main role of civil society that can play in terms of pushing for gender equality and highlighting issues of gender empowerment?
I think that the role of civil society is very important because we have the opportunity to not only to tell something that we study or we analyze. We have also the opportunity to speak based on the experience that a lot of organizations have in the field with project, for example, doing action in the field. And because we have the opportunity to test in a very little dimension something that could work also in a biggest dimension. If I think to the work that we implement as IDOS, we implement some project to support the sexual reproductive health and rights, and we can choose or also to combat gender-based violence. And we, in some cases, could choose the solution to some problem also to politicians. And the idea is to influence and advocate the policy in order to solve some problem. This is a very important input that the civil society organization can provide. And also another important asset that we have, this is the networking. We are connected with a lot of organizations from all over the world. Of course, we are each of us is working in a specific field, but we have experience also from other, and we can push together for the same objective, like gender equality. So the importance of networking and to demonstrate thanks to our project and actions that some measure can be helpful. I think that it's the best thing. And then we hope to be heard by our politicians, because we are here to support, to give inputs, and they have just to be collected from us. I hope they will do that. I think that also supporting the statement that we produce, that are the outcome of a lot of people thinking to the same objective, it's important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Amanda, we have a question actually from the audience, from Mr. Ali Abul Hassan. How can men become better allies?
Well, maybe I should publish my list of 10 ideas. I think first of all, I think part of the challenge is that some of the underlying issues for women are things that men aren't comfortable asking. So, but I do think there are some really obvious ways that men can be helpful. For starters, be thoughtful about the environments in which you encourage your team to go out. Now, obviously, right now, we're not going out after work because we're not in offices, we're at home. But one of the things on my list, and one of the things that I often talk to men about, is that, part of the reason why what we call the old boys network exists is because men are much more kind of flexible about how they meet up after work. So they're going out for a beer, they're going out with other men after work is something that I don't think men realize actually excludes women. And it's not that they're necessarily deliberately excluding women, but understanding that that making decisions about how your team socializes has an impact on women, in that women often need to be able to schedule when they go out after work. And so I've often said to men, think about making it a standard practice that every second Tuesday, the team goes out after work. Women can get themselves organized if they have enough notice. And the second thing is, rather than just going for a beer, and I know depending on the cultural setting, that may not be the case for everybody on this call, but certainly in New York, the going for the beer happens. I say, I challenge, why not be a bit more creative and take your team bowling? And everyone laughs when I say go bowling because it seems a funny thing to say. But I say bowling because men and women can do it equally. Yeah, there may be a beer involved, but it's not the main focus. And frankly, there's no expertise needed. Like golf, the challenge is that women feel they have to be really good at it, and women have to, women have to dress a certain way. There are certain things that you can be thoughtful about. Ask women on your team, what would you like to do? What would you suggest we do as a team? And actually, take their advice. So I think there are some really, really practical ways. I'm also going to recommend that for any of the men on the call, actually for women too, because it's really an interesting piece. There's a wonderful animated short film called Pearl, P-U-R-L. So if you Google Pixar and Pearl, P-U-R-L, it's a short form animated film that is about the first woman to join a fund on the investment team. The fund is called Bro Capital, which is very funny, and it really takes you through her journey of what it feels like to be the only one. And I think with men watching that film can really understand what it feels like to be different. And it's also interesting to see her journey through that. So I think the first step is for men to understand that things aren't the same for women as they are for men, and to engage in those conversations. And I think as women, we need to make it easier to have those conversations. Very often it's seen as a combative thing, men versus women. But actually we also need to speak up and say, can I just suggest that we do this in a different way? And to have men kind of listen to that. So I think there are many ways that men can be helpful. And there's another thing that we've been doing at 100 Women where we've engaged men, and that is we've been doing what we call first impressions dinners, where we invite senior men in the industry to bring their daughters and their nieces to an event where those teenage girls are exposed to women who are in different roles in the industry. And it's really interesting because when you engage men in that process, they begin to see the world in a different way because they're seeing things through the eyes of their teenage daughter. Those teenagers leave that room very often saying to their dad or their uncle, how many portfolio managers do you have that are women, Dad, right? And when it's your daughter asking you that question, all of a sudden, you need an answer, don't you? And you actually think about it differently. So I think also to really encourage men, I think someone else had mentioned, have conversations. Teach negotiating skills to your daughter, right? So have the conversations with your daughter that you're having with your son, right? Don't think that women aren't interested in what you do. Don't think that women aren't going to have a perspective on something. So there are a couple of ways, but I think just speaking up and saying, I want to make a difference, that's really the first step in engaging men.
Perfect, beautiful. Yvonne, this is a question, probably many of us, we think about this. When is a moment in your career when you knew that you did not have full gender equality or realized there was a gender inequality?
I'm a little bit ashamed to say that it happens often. It's happened from the beginning of my career to to now. You experience activities different. Your suggestions and your tone may be exactly the same comment as a man, and somehow it's heard differently. And I think through this process, we could always find ways to improve that communication. And as Amanda and Marguerita had suggested, learning how to negotiate and also bring men into the room will maybe influence that input. Also, I think women working closer with women and supporting each other on ideas on implementation of how to communicate with men in the working environment. I don't think the men do it intentionally. I just feel as though maybe sometimes they feel more comfortable with a woman, and so they could express themselves more comfortably. So maybe they're more intimidated by a man for multiple reasons. And so sharing and negotiating and contributing is a little different many times for a woman.
Anybody else would like to share their experience? With the first time they realized that, the moment in their career when they knew they did not have full gender equality?
Maha, may I contribute to that?
Sure, please go ahead.
Starting out in local politics as a college student, I actually was a manager of these men, and I was asked to go to Hooters restaurant with them to eat, and they didn't think it was a big deal. I told them I was very uncomfortable with that. They said, "Oh, the wings are great." I said, again, as a woman, I don't feel comfortable with that. And unfortunately, I had to go, and I shouldn't have done that at the time, but I went along because they weren't going to have an important meeting where important things were going to be said, and I would have missed everything. And I regret going with them. It's not about the Hooters restaurant. It's not about the morale of it, but the fact that, objectifying women, and they purposely wanted to have it there to make me feel uncomfortable, even though I outranked them. So I always regret, even just as a college student, allowing them to do that and not taking charge of the situation, even though I was their manager. And I know Yvonne said it was embarrassing for her, and that's actually something that is incredibly embarrassing for me. And I was debating whether or not to mention it, but I want to mention it because, powerful women like us, we all have those stories, and we should never be embarrassed about it, because other people right now are saying, oh, they've had that moment as well. I promise you, people in the audience are saying that to themselves right now.
I agree. I mean, we all have this period where we are in this situation where we're not comfortable with something, but the social pressure, the environment, you find yourself, playing according to the rules of the men, because they're the majority, because they're the ones who are dominating the scene or whatever, and you feel pressured to go along and play the way they're expecting you to act. Well, this has been really a very wonderful session. Really, I think we've heard a lot of interesting points and suggestions. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to ask if anybody wants to have a last word or something to mention that we didn't address during this time. If anybody has last words to say before I wrap up.
May I add the one thing?
Sure.
Just as we are closing our dialogue, that was very, very interesting. Thank you to everybody. I would like just to say that we have to remember that gender mainstreaming, women's empowerment is something that was stressed in the Beijing Declaration Platform of Action of Beijing. That is now this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary. So I think it's important to stress this document, the Platform of Action, that is still new in terms of content, unfortunately, because the progress that have been done are not enough for us. And also I would like to remember that this is also the 20 years of the 3025 resolution on women's and peace and security. That was also the first resolution where women were included as agent of peace, and also for our role in the society. So just to give these two reference historical, but at the same time very very actual for the situation and for the discussion that we had in terms of gender equality. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, just a few days ago.
Oh, I'm sorry, Maha. Sorry,
Yeah.
your lag was on. I didn't hear you speaking until now. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that thank you, Maria, because the UNGA just celebrated a few days ago 25 years for the Beijing Declaration and the Platform of Action, which was a turning point and a very important document. And we're still following up and trying to reach those goals that have been stated in that declaration. Christina, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I created this panel because I believe that G20 can truly make a progressive year. I'm going to repeat it again. This does not have to be a washout year, G20, because of COVID. This can be your landmark year. We've all suggested actionable items that are possible and probable. We urge you to pass them. This can happen. These are not things that are out of reach, but actually truly within ourselves to do as humanity, as people, as politicians, and as a G20. And I thank Maha and I thank all the speakers, and I really appreciate all the participation from everyone, including the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, thank you, all of you. Really, this has been a very wonderful discussion. Thank you for all the speakers. It was really great to hear you and to learn from your experiences. Marguerita, Amanda, Yvonne, Maria, Grazia, and of course, Christina. We heard some very practical suggestions regarding women's rights, regarding ending gender-based violence, women's empowerment in the financial sector, women's rights in education, in health, as well as the importance of the visibility of women and having role models and having the ability to network among women in order to learn from each other's experiences. And of course, the other suggestions of national coalition for women, as well as reaching out to grassroots and civil society. I think we've heard some very important, very interesting practical suggestions. And as you know, this session is recorded, so we can hear it later on the platform for C20 and hear it again and go over all the suggestions which will be included in the documents. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much.